Every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online. Across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
On Mark Dolan Tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for The Briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:31 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood. Today on the show we explore what on earth does COP27 mean. We're also going to tackle the migrant boat crisis, the Gavin Williamson scandal and the U-turning Labour Party leader. All that to come after the headlines.
A very good morning. It's 9:31. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, is looking at tax rises and spending cuts of up to £60 billion to address the black hole in the public finances. Well, Treasury sources say that over half of this could come from cuts, which is likely to put further strain on services. Well, the government's currently preparing its autumn statement, which will be announced on the 17th of November. The Bank of England have previously warned that the country is facing the longest recession in over a century. The Prime Minister says texts sent by Sir Gavin Williamson to a female colleague were not acceptable or right. Rishi Sunak told The Sun he'd been aware of the messages sent to former Chief Whip Wendy Morton, but didn't know the details. He's under fire for bringing Sir Gavin back into the Cabinet, despite being told he was under investigation. The M25 has been closed this morning between junctions 6 and 7 in Surrey after a protester climbed an overhead gantry. Surrey Police says they closed the road for the safety of everyone while officers are working to remove the activist. Met Police preemptively launched a major operation to arrest people suspected of planning reckless and serious protests as COP27 gets underway. There's going to be further disruption to rail services today, despite a series of train strikes being called off. RMT suspended the strike, saying they've secured the promise of a pay offer from the train operating companies. Well, Network Rail says there will be quite a mixed picture of delays and cancellations today, depending on the operator. And, of course, COP27 is underway. We'll have more details on that for you across the day. But for now, you're up to date on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. It's GB News. Now let's head to the briefing with Tom.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:33 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. And another week and another member of the government under scrutiny. Yes, this time it's the well-known former Education and Defence Secretary Gavin Williamson. He's now a minister without portfolio, but how much trouble is he in? We'll also be looking at the ongoing migrant crisis in the Channel, how we got here through a continued systematic failures by the country. And where is the Prime Minister? Well, yes, Rishi Sunak is in Sharm el-Sheikh, of course. He's at COP27, where he'll be delivering a speech at 4 p.m. today and having a bilateral meeting with the French President, Emmanuel Macron. But first today, I'm delighted to be joined in the studio now by our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. And Catherine, firstly, this Gavin Williamson scandal, if we can call it a scandal, has been rumbling for several days now. It dominated many of the Sunday papers, and the Prime Minister was asked about it on the flight over to Egypt today. What's the latest position from Number 10?
Yes, Rishi Sunak has said that they were unacceptable, that the comments were clearly not right, but has also said that Gavin Williamson was very sorry and clearly wants to move on from this. Of course, this comes hot on the heels of the dispute about Suella Braverman, him appointing Suella Braverman after she had just been resigned a week earlier. So some questions, I think, inevitable about the Prime Minister's judgment. I mean, he came in literally 2 weeks ago, tomorrow it will be, promising a government of integrity, professionalism, accountability. So I think at the moment he'll be probably quite relieved to be in Egypt, away from all the problems in Westminster.
Is everyone being a bit too sensitive here? Yes, of course, it's inappropriate language to use to colleagues. It's one of the messages seemed to be threatening in a way. But ultimately, isn't the relationship that we've come to know about chief whips and backbench MPs, it is robust. It is often strong, and there are many stories going back many years about how chief whips almost need to be threatening. When Gavin Williamson was a chief whip, he kept a tarantula called Kronos on his desk. When the previous chief whip before Wendy Morton was in post, he kept a little a device used for castrating bulls on his desk. I wonder if Wendy Morton just wasn't robust enough.
He was also pictured with a whip, not very subtly, on his desk as well, wasn't he? Yes, I mean, certainly those sorts of comments that were published by the Sunday Times yesterday, those WhatsApp messages full of expletives, wouldn't be tolerated in a normal workplace. But Westminster, of course, is not a normal workplace at all. Gavin Williamson is known as a master of the dark arts. He knows where the bodies are buried. That's possibly part of the reason that Rishi Sunak brought him in. But certainly the ways that the whips used to operate, the combination of carrot and stick with a lot of stick, may increasingly be on the way out. There's another story in the Times today that a female minister, after these allegations yesterday, has come forward to say that in 2016, Gavin Williamson, chief whip at the time, had a conversation with her which she took as a tacit threat. She was going against the government on a matter, and he talked about aspects of her private life. Now, they are saying he was doing that in a pastoral capacity. But she has taken a rather different view of that. So
And I suppose many people would. However, to many people who've read about how the Whip's office worked in the 1980s, in the 1990s, this would be sort of par for the course. The Whips sort of do bury the bodies for you. They sort of help you along and skirt around difficult things as long as you vote in line. Are we being naive to expect that the Whip's office no longer works like this?
Well, I think Wendy Morton, who was Chief Whip, may have been rather less effective as a Chief Whip. I mean, we saw what happened over the fracking vote. It was hoped that she, being a female, the first female Chief Whip, would have taken a different approach. But of course, she was massively ineffective. But I think certainly the way that it has worked in the past, there is more and more scrutiny, isn't there? There is more and more light being shone into the ways and workings of Westminster. And so the way things may have gone for decades is increasingly going to come under scrutiny.
Really, really interesting stuff there, Catherine. Thank you for bringing us all the latest. But, of course, that's not the only scandal facing the government. It may be seen by some people as one of the lesser scandals involving the government because, of course, the Channel crossings crisis is one that is not going away. In fact, it's getting far worse. In 2020, 8,404 people made the life-threatening journey across the Channel in small boats. In 2021, that number rose to 28,526. Now this year, it looks like the numbers will swell again, comfortably to top 40,000. The system is, as the Home Secretary herself admits, broken. But how did it become so broken? And why have successive Home Secretaries been unable to fix it? Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me now is political commentator John Oxley, who on Friday wrote an incredibly incisive explanation about how we got here and, crucially, why no party is prepared to say the hard truths to fix it. Thank you for joining me this morning. First of all, what has led us to this mess?
There's a couple of different factors, Tom, that have built up to this. One, we have growing global instability that creates a flow of migrants, and it's easier to move around than ever before. You know, say when we were dealing with migrants and refugees in the aftermath of the Second World War, it was much harder, much more expensive to move. That has diminished quite a bit. But also, at the same time, the government, over many years, has reduced and basically eliminated the so-called legal routes to entry. So you can no longer apply for asylum in the UK from outside of the UK. You can't go to your local British embassy, fill out a form and wait to see what the British government wants to do with you. And we've made it much harder to use, say, conventional methods of transport to arrive. You can't arrive in the country without a visa if you're from a country that's generally in trouble. You know, even from Ukraine, you needed a visa to come just on holiday. But to apply to a visa, one of the things you have to say is, I'm definitely not going to stay in Britain. I'm not going to apply for asylum. So if you arrive and declare that you are applying for asylum, the Home Office say, well, you lied on your form, that's an offence, you are now deported, you are banned from entering the UK. And sort of the final thing that has changed this is, up until the Brexit negotiations, we had this agreement with France where the UK border was in France, effectively. So you could arrive there, and if you made your way through the fences, which we saw a lot of, you were then technically on British soil, so you could apply there, but you could be held in Calais. And during that time, you sort of saw the other routes, so people climbing on lorries was very popular because you'd get through the Channel Tunnel, you would arrive at Folkestone, and that's where you present yourself. And all of that has been clamped down on quite successfully. And so the only way left now is to travel across the Channel by boat.
So it's like this game of whack-a-mole, really. All these other places have been closed down and people have been forced into these boats. I suppose this is something that people on the Conservative side of politics are reticent to admit, that because there is now no offshore application, because the only way in which you can apply for asylum is, frankly, by getting to the UK illegally, that's forcing some genuine asylum seekers to make this really treacherous and indeed illegal route.
Absolutely that if you're one of these people in trouble, I had it with some friends from Ukraine who I was trying to help earlier in the year, and I spoke to a lawyer and they said, there is no legal way for them to get here. The only way is to take their risk and try and get onto a flight, or otherwise, if you don't have the resources to do that, then you're forced to arrive in Calais, to make a deal with these people smugglers and get across the channel, or at least get far enough out that the people who rescue you are the British Royal Navy, and they'll take you onto British soil, and at that point is the only point where you can apply for asylum.
Although for a time in Nice, the British government set up a processing facility specifically for Ukrainians, and indeed for Syrians. We've had a programme with regards to migrant camps over in the area, and indeed for Afghans as well, there's been a programme. But I suppose outside of those three specific countries, there is no programme, no legal route for people to claim, and that muddies the waters.
Yes, exactly that. That if you're part of one of those well-publicised schemes, there is a route. That's what happened in the end with Ukrainians and Afghans. But say you're caught up in some of the religious violence in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, somewhere like Somalia, there is no scheme, there is no route, and you're promised all sorts of things by people smugglers, and you end up in Calais.
But of course we are seeing that in the last few months, a huge proportion, up to 40% of those coming across, aren't coming from hugely war-torn places. In fact, there's been a huge degree of Albanians coming across, a huge increase in the number there. I suppose creating legal routes for genuine refugees would not help that side of the issue.
That wouldn't, but it helps the aspect of people sort of putting themselves in, because if legitimate asylum seekers from countries where you have a very strong meritorious claim can claim in a processing facility in France, or even in refugee camps close to their own country, it means that the illegal routes are only really being used by people who are trying to exploit the system. And so you can take a much tougher line with those sort of people. It becomes easier to process and deport them when they get into the country. And that's part of the other problem, that our processing is very, very slow. It takes nearly 2 years on average for people's claims, whether they're valid or not, to be processed.
Why did it take such a long time? That's an extraordinary amount of time.
It's a combination, it comes from both sides, but we have, generally in the Home Office, the process is very slow, it's very bureaucratic, it's not helped by, you're generally dealing people with relatively low levels of English, relatively low levels of education, who aren't used to dealing with the state, and then also you get a lot of legal appeals that get stuck in the immigration appeals tribunal system. Things move slowly through that. But what that means is if you have 200-300 people a day arriving on boats, which they do at the height of the crisis, and you're taking sort of 500-600 days to process those claims, you quite quickly get a massive build-up of people in limbo. And that's ultimately the problem we're seeing in places like Manston, where these people are here, we're processing their claims. Some of them will have very valid claims, some of them won't. But for the time being, we have to do something with them. And we've not really invested enough resources in how we deal with it. We can have all sorts of debates about the long term, how many people we're allowed to stay, what the criteria are, but we still have this problem short term. How do we make sure they're housed, fed, and not riddled with disease, which I don't think anyone really wants.
So because there are no legal routes, we get this big illegal problem, and that's a system that's been gummed up by bureaucracy and by activist lawyers, and we've got this sort of perfect storm where none of the real causal issues are being dealt with by politicians. It's a really tricky mess. Let's hope that some politicians might listen to some of those criticisms and hopefully work towards a system that can be better implemented. But for now, John Oxley, thank you so much for coming in and explaining all of that. Now, yesterday, the British presidency of the UN COP programme passed on to Egypt. And today, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is at Sharm el-Sheikh, where he will later speak and meet French President Emmanuel Macron on the sidelines of the summit. But what's COP all about? And did the UK achieve anything in its year as president? Well, joining me now is Brian Whittle, the Scottish Conservative Shadow Minister for the Environment. Thank you for joining us this morning. Firstly, I remember two particularly, well, I was about to say happy weeks. Some of the days were happy, but God, it did drag on a little bit. I was in Glasgow for COP26 this time last year. Did that achieve anything?
I think it did. I think that, for the first time, really, it was one of the bigger COPs, as sort of happen once every 5 years. I think we brought a lot of the world's main leaders together, and we got some real progress, not as much as we need, but we've got some real progress. I think what we need to look at now is what's happened since, and have all the promises that were made back then, have they been adhered to? And I think that's a question that I would suggest that it needs to be asked, because I think there's a lot of people rolling back on the promises they made at COP26.
I suppose this is the crucial point about COP. There's literally no point in just one country committing to do something here. If it's just the United Kingdom that says we're going to get to net zero by 2050 and no one else does it, we're not going to solve the issue. In fact, we're just going to cripple our own economy. So it's really, really crucial that other countries do the same and that we all move together at the same pace.
To a degree, I think you're right, but that doesn't mean that we can't lead the way. I would disagree with you that it would cripple our economy to go into a green economy. I think that's ultimately the direction of travel that everybody will have to go in. I think it's quite feasible to have a vibrant economy and a green economy at the same time. In fact, it's crucial that we do. And where we're going with engineering, where we're going with energy, where we're going with transport, I think we need to push harder. And I do think that Britain can lead the way. But you're right, it's a global issue, and we need global solutions to it.
Now, looking at some of the big no-shows this year in Sharm el-Sheikh, the Indian Prime Minister is not going. The Chinese, are we supposed to call him Chairman Xi now that he's president for life? Well, President Xi of China's not there. The Australian Prime Minister is not there. Some of the biggest polluters in the world are not attending, not even Canada making its full diplomatic representations. Why should we be so involved if some of the big oil, gas and coal people of the world aren't?
Again, two of the biggest polluters, China and India, not going to COP. But I do think that as globally we can put pressure on these people, on these countries, we can make sure that when we are purchasing from these countries, that we're only purchasing from what we import is produced from a green economy. But we have to do. We can't do nothing. We can't just sit back and go, they're not doing it, and therefore we're not doing it. We have to try and gather and galvanise as much of the world's population as we possibly can and keep pulling them in. China actually has made some significant progress. They're still massive polluters, but they've made some significant progress, and we've got to keep encouraging them. We've got to bring them into the fold as much as we can. So it is, you are right to an extent, but we have to keep trying to raise the bar year on year on year, because there's no other option for us, actually.
I suppose China did commit to net zero, I think it was by 2060 at COP26, rather than by 2050. So still some way to go, but some form of commitment from them. It'll be interesting to see whether they follow through on the policy that matters too, which no doubt will be discussed over the coming 2 weeks at COP27. But for now, Brian Whittle, Scottish Conservative Shadow Environment Minister, thank you for joining me here on the briefing this morning. Really interesting stuff. Now, finally today, as we've discussed before on the programme, it's not just the Prime Minister and his recent Tory predecessors who've been U-turning so much they could probably solve the energy crisis by attaching themselves to some sort of dynamo. No, the Labour Party leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has also performed the most astonishing of policy position reversals. And I'm delighted to be able to discuss this now with my next guest. Atul Hatwell is from Labour Uncut. And firstly, I want to explore the 10 pledges on which Sir Keir Starmer stood to be the Labour Party leader. He promised abolishing tuition fees. He promised freedom of movement with the EU. He promised nationalisation of rail, of mail, of all these different utilities. And then he abandoned them. What went on?
I think we can draw a broad conclusion that the world was different back then. When Keir Starmer ran for leader, it was pre-COVID. It was pre the world of rampant inflation. It was pre the spending squeezes that we're facing now. It was also, frankly, a politician running an election and an internal election. And I think what happened and how people pitched themselves in 2019, we only have to look at some of the promises that were made in the Conservative manifesto to see that the world has moved on, and when the facts change, so your approach needs to change. And I think it's as really as sort of straightforward as that.
From our politicians, though, one group say, well, the other lot are U-turning, so we might as well U-turn, and the other lot say the same thing. Is this just sort of a very low bar for our politicians to stand at? Can we believe anything they say at election time?
Well, I think there's different different timelines here. There's policy positions that politicians would have held 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. Policy positions before huge events. For example, Liz Truss was Prime Minister. She was elected by the Conservative Party membership, having campaigned passionately to stay in the European Union. Times change, policies change. And I think we can give people and politicians the benefit of the doubt sometimes in that they'll change their views. Where this becomes egregious is over very short time periods where the facts haven't changed. It's just their comfort level and they come under attack and suddenly they spin a U-turn. And I think that is where trust and integrity come more to the fore. If you said one thing in August and have U-turned on it by September and then U-turned again on it by November, that's what stimulates a lack of trust. If you say some things which are demonstrably proven to be lies, as happened with the Prime Minister before last, Boris Johnson, on Partygate, that's what undermines trust. But when the facts change and the circumstances change, the public expect a responsible government to reflect the new reality.
Now, I want to explore the new reality that we're in as a country, because, of course, your campaign, Labour Uncut, has been opposing many of the austerity measures that the country's seen over the last decade or so. And we're now going into a new period that some people might describe as austerity 2.0, where the government tried to spend more than it took in tax under Liz Truss. And as a result, the markets took fright. As a result of an expected fiscal loosening, gilt yields rose, the cost of borrowing rose, and everything became tricky. Does that make your campaign, does that raise questions for your campaign about whether or not austerity is really a political choice? Clearly, if the country tries to spend more than it takes in, the markets are going to go haywire.
I think there are three parts to this. Number one, the key with the markets was a credible medium-term plan. They just didn't believe that enough money would come in. So that's part one, which is it doesn't mean one doesn't have to indulge in egregious and horrendous cuts immediately. One just has to produce a plan that works over an economic cycle. Number two, we have to, and this is just a truth of life, we have to increase the amount of money coming in. And that means probably changes to how taxes are dealt with. It means maybe looking at taxes across the board on how normalising or standardising how taxes on income are handled. And I think the Labour Party and Keir Starmer's talked about that in the past. And it also means reform of public services in the medium term, because we are in a short-term crunch, but equally in the medium term, to get best value for money, public service reform is a hugely important strand of thought. It doesn't address the sort of the today problem, but it'll help the tomorrow challenge be addressed. So those are the three sort of strands: medium to long term, credible with the markets, increase the base of resources coming in, and also look strongly at public service reform to make our services more efficient.
I wonder how much difference there is now really between the Tory and the Labour Party, given that a lot of that is what it's expected to come out of Jeremy Hunt's fiscal plan on the 17th of this month. We've run to the end of the programme, but Atul Hatwell of Labour Uncut, thank you for joining us here on The Briefing this morning. Appreciate your time. That's it for me today. Up next, it's Bev Turner Today, a brand new show to kickstart your morning. I'll be back at 9:30 tomorrow.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I